Well, thank you, Brian, for inviting me. And I hope we can have some fun together this evening. I see we have a few kids here. It looks like I'm going to be confined to this spot if I don't want feedback, right? No? If I walk forward, it'll still be okay? Yep, I better stay back here. Yeah, my name's Kalvin Morauske, and I am not an expert at anything. I just love here. Maybe that'd be better. But I feel so far away. You guys will have to look alive so that I can feel like there's some energy here. My name's Kalvin Morauske, and if I can get this to work... There we go. I'm a physical therapist. I'm not a geologist. The flyer that some of you probably saw, I think said something about me being a scientist. I don't know that I would consider myself to be a scientist, but I love science. And I particularly love science that supports the Bible. And other things that aren't necessarily science. I mean, I have an interest in petroglyphs and their meaning. And I know a gal in Boise named Coyote Short. Coyote Short is an Indian, and she has helped us understand some of the petroglyphs, and there's amazing information out there that I won't share with you tonight. But those are the things that really interest me. My wife is Debbie. She's sitting in the back with Cora and Audrey, our friends when they used to live in Battleground, and now you get to enjoy them. Thank you, Brian. I have one blood grandchild. His name is Andrew, born about 1.5 years ago. But since I put this program together, I have 3 more step-grandkids. My daughter married a young man this past summer, and so now I have 3 more grandkids, and we're excited about that. Back in 1977, I was in college, and I came across this book called Renee Norenbergen's Secret of the Lost Races. Have any of you seen that book or read that book? A few of you have. I think Brian owns one, and I didn't realize it was in reprint until Brian shared it with me again. So that's the book that really got me interested in science and things in the past that support the Bible's view of history. Well, since then, after that, I went to Loma Linda to get my degree in physical therapy. And while I was at Loma Linda, I went to the library one day, and I didn't have as much to do. And I thought, well, I wonder if they have anything on this topic in this big library at Loma Linda University. And I found 2 books on ooparts. Do you guys know what ooparts are? A few of you are shaking your heads. Ooparts stands for out-of-place artifacts that are hard to explain. Like back east somewhere, there was a person shoveling coal to put in their furnace to heat their house, and a chunk of coal hits the floor and breaks in 2, and there's a gold chain embedded in both halves of the piece of coal. Well, how do you explain that? Well, if you're an evolutionist, you can't really explain it. But as a creationist, we can explain it. So I found a couple of books and I read through some of that stuff. But, life is busy. I had to study and graduate, and then I had a family to support, and I just never got to pursue my interests. But about 12 to 13 years ago, I went to a presentation done by Dr. Doug Newton. Have any of you heard of Dr. Doug Newton? Has he come up here to give his presentations? Maybe not. I know he went to the Boise area a number of times, but I was fascinated by all the stuff that Dr. Doug Newton had to share. that led me to check on the internet. Is there something I can do to keep it from ringing? Maybe I'm just hearing the ring. Okay. Well, if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and we'll stop. We're not real formal, I don't think, here. So, yeah, that led me to check out on the internet because I had heard that there were tours from a creationist perspective down the Grand Canyon. And I was interested in doing that, and I finally found these canyon ministry tours, but they were extremely expensive, and I figured, well, I couldn't do that. But in the meantime, I found a site called creationencounter.com, started by a couple of guys. Let's see here. Started by a couple of guys in Hood River, Oregon. And they were taken under the wing of a guy named Harold Coffin. Have you ever heard of Harold Coffin? He's was a Seventh-day Adventist. He's now deceased, but he was a professor at Walla Walla in paleontology and geology. And Dr. Coffin took these two guys, John and Dennis, under his wing and took them on trips for 10 years, anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. Every summer, they'd go on trips and explore, and John decided to start his own tour group, and he takes people on tours to share the things that he learned. And I got to go on a number of these tours. You'll notice these are most of the tours that I've been on. Some years ago, when I first started doing this, I convinced my wife to carve out a few days of our vacation to go to John Day, Oregon area and go with this group, and we were going to look for fossils and look for other geology stuff, and she wasn't too excited. This was my passion, not hers. But the first day out, we went to Picture Gorge, and there was a guy explaining some of the pictographs that are like petroglyphs, but they're painted. And one of them was like the end of a rake. So you had these marks going down this way and tied together. And he said that the Paiute Indians were the ones responsible. And they put this symbol up there, and it's a symbol for the week, the 7-day week cycle. And he said the Paiutes had a history of worshiping their creator every 7th day. And my wife perked up. She says, maybe there's something to this group. So from there, I've gone on many different tours. And finally, not this past summer, but the summer before, I got to fulfill my long dream of going down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon on a raft. So that's part of the reason why I agreed to put this presentation together, is to share some of the information that I learned on that trip and going on some of these other trips. And I initially did it for some friends that live in Tennessee, and I did my first major presentation back there. And so Brian, I guess, somehow heard that I might be willing, and so I am now sharing it with you. So I'm not a professional pastor or presenter, just a person that loves this kind of information. So, went to the Grand Canyon. Let's see. Yep. Went to Bryce, Zion, North Rim of the Grand Canyon, and a week-long trip down the Colorado River, Monument Valley, Natural Bridges, and Arches National Park. My wife joined us for the first week, and then she flew home. Then my sister and her husband flew out from Virginia to go on the raft trip, and then they flew home at the end of the raft trip, and my niece and my daughter and myself finished out the trip. A 3-week-long trip that was amazing. Now, you've all seen pictures of the Grand Canyon, I'm sure. The Grand Canyon is a magnificent place. but it does look different from the river. You know, and it was hot. It was very hot. And at the end of the trip, my sister asked me, "Kalvin, would you do this again?" And I had to think about it. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was hot. One day we were hiking up a canyon, and one of the boat people was along with me, and I said, "Boy, it is hot out here. How hot do you think it is?" She says, "Well, it's 113 today." Well, I'm from Western Washington. I don't experience those kind of temperatures, so I had to think about it. But if you go down the river in the Grand Canyon, or you look from the rim, there's two main questions that come to mind. What caused this immense canyon, and what caused all the layers? Well, if you ask a ranger on the rim, he'll tell you it took millions and millions of years for that river to carve out the canyon. Well, that just isn't so. There's evidence in the canyon that you just cannot explain with long time periods. In fact, if it were true, the canyon would be getting deeper and deeper even in our lifetime, right? In fact, they'll tell you that every year it's about 3 or 4 paper thick amount that the river is cutting down. And one young girl at the rim asked the ranger, "Well, who measures that?" Well, that's a good question, because nobody does. In fact, one of the things I learned going down the Grand Canyon is that the river is filling up. Because every time they have torrential rains, and in later July and August, September, the weather patterns are such that they'll get these thunder showers, and it'll pass over a little area and just dump. And when that happens, it erodes these canyons, and it comes down, and sometimes there's large erosion and big rocks, and it fills up the canyon. And the water current or flow is not sufficient to wash it out. So it's filling up. It's not being carved down. And some might say, well, yeah, but before the dams, it would wash it out. No, that's not true. Even the flow before they put in the dam wasn't sufficient to really clear out the rock. So in the bottom, below the surface of the river, down in the bottom of the riverbed, it's full of big boulders that don't move. Now, how do you carve it out? You don't. It's not getting carved out today. Well, you know, I know there's a lot of people that are much more knowledgeable about the Grand Canyon than me. I feel very inadequate, but I want to share with you a much larger event and help you understand that the Grand Canyon is just not an isolated thing. It was part of a much bigger picture. And I want to introduce you to the concept of the Grand Staircase. In the 1870s, there was a geologist by the name of Clarence Dutton who conceptualized this area as a staircase or grand staircase. And notice the labels across the top: Bryce Canyon on the far right and the Grand Canyon on the far left. And we're going to come back to this many times. But there is another concept I want to share with you, and that is the Colorado Plateau. Has anyone heard of the Colorado Plateau? A few of you have. Well, the Colorado Plateau is the area that's kind of tan or gray in the middle of the green, and it covers major portions of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. And maybe some of you have even done what this guy did, and he put extremities in all 4 states at the same time. Now, I have to confess, I haven't been to Four Corners, but maybe some of you have been to Four Corners. But you'll notice that Four Corners is close to the middle of the Colorado Plateau. Now, the Colorado Plateau is a very large area, 130,000 square miles. It's big. And it's composed of sedimentary layers. That's layers that have been laid down by water. Well, if you can imagine this area of 130,000 square miles being pushed up 10,000 feet. Now, how do you explain that? These layers that we find in the Grand Canyon and all over the Colorado Plateau, they extend to major portions of North America. But we get to see them in the Colorado Plateau because they got pushed up and exposed. So, you know, I didn't share this information in Tennessee, partly because they were live broadcasting, and you can go on YouTube, and if you search my name, you can find the 3 presentations. And because there's some real conflict in people's understanding of what happened at the time of the flood, I didn't really include that, but for you guys, I will. You know, at the time of the flood, the earth crust was terribly disrupted, and we had continent-sized plates that moved on layers of water. You know, the Bible says the fountains of the deep were broken up. Well, there was water down there, and that water provided lubrication, and so it allowed some plates on the earth's crust to move. Now, if you can imagine, I got to use my hands. If you can imagine a plate moving like so and impacting another plate or grinding to a halt, the inertia is incomprehensible. So you have a major portion of the United States, or what is the United States, coming like so, and grinding to a halt. There was tremendous buckling. So you have the Rocky Mountains, part of this buckling ridge, that just blasted up through the floodwaters and then recoiled. And that put tremendous pressure on the mantle of the earth, where it's liquid rock. And that pressure was kind of like a teeter. Most of you as kids have been on a teeter, and if you put a big kid at one end, boom, the little kid goes up. Well, when the Rocky Mountains came up and they recoiled down, they put pressure on the mantle, which caused a teeter effect and pushed up the Colorado Plateau. And we find plateaus around the world next to mountain ranges. Now you know why. Because of this recoiling effect, it pushed up these plateaus. Well, this Colorado Plateau, 130,000 square miles got pushed up. 10,000 feet. Well, if that real estate rose up out of a lake, if you can imagine a pond, maybe you've got a pond near your property or little quiet duck pond. Well, if all of a sudden there was something underneath that pond that pushed up like so, the water would drain off. And when the water would drain off catastrophically, it would cause some major erosion features. And that's exactly what we find on the Colorado Plateau, is erosion features. Now, to help us understand, I want to take you to Monument Valley. Monument Valley was towards the end of our trip, but it's special because I'd never been there before, but most of us have seen pictures or at least movies that included parts of Monument Valley. Well, the scientists will tell you that Monument Valley was eroded by wind and rain. Okay, well, if you look at that, where did all the dirt go? And there's no rivers there. Well, if wind and rain did that, well, Where's all the dirt and where's the rivers? There aren't any. Here's another view. I had to shave. My wife doesn't like it. So, but that's my daughter. The other picture was my daughter and my niece. But I want you to understand something. When the Colorado Plateau came up, there was 2,500 feet. That's half a mile of material above these buttes. So that's all gone, and the material in and around these buttes is gone. Where did it go? And if you corner a typical geologist, they really have to clear their throat because they don't really know. But we have the answer. Here's another look at these buttes. These buttes, the tallest one is about 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And just to put things into perspective, the valley floor is the level, in the layers wise, is the level of the rim of the Grand Canyon. Now, did you catch that? The valley floor is at the level geologically as the rim of the Grand Canyon. We've already learned, I've already told you that there's 2,500 feet above the buttes. The buttes are about 1,000 feet, so that's 3,500 feet of material that's gone even at the rim of the Grand Canyon. So to help you put things into perspective, that arrow points out a house. This is Indian property, Native American property, and so they're allowed to live there and farm there or raise some cattle, I think. But at any rate, that's one of their houses. So back to the grand staircase. If you notice the green arrow, it is pointing to the Pink Cliffs. Then you move down a ways, quite a ways. In the middle of the picture, you have Vermillion Cliffs, which we'll take a look at, and finally the rim of the Grand Canyon. Now notice these layers didn't all rise evenly. In fact, there's a significant buckling up of the layers at the Grand Canyon, and we'll cover that a little bit more later. The Grand Canyon, the rim of the Grand Canyon on the north side at the blue arrow is 8,297 feet, about 8,300 feet elevation in today's world. The Pink Cliffs, where Bryce Canyon is, they are about 8,000 to 9,000 feet of today's elevation. But you notice these layers kind of slant up because it didn't rise evenly. This is a picture I pulled off the internet, so I can't tell you where it was taken, but it gives you the grand staircase concept of all these layers and how they were staircased up. Again, the Pink Cliffs are Bryce Canyon, White Cliff is Zion, where Zion National Park is, and then the Vermillion Cliffs are lower down. Now the Vermillion Cliffs are just above where we put in to go down the Grand Canyon. And yes, that's my truck and trailer that took us 3,400 miles on this trip, not counting the boat miles in the Grand Canyon. But the question remains, if you look at this, where did all the material go and how did it leave? A simple river and wind and rain does not explain hundreds and thousands of cubic miles of material that's just flat gone. So to help us understand, let's go to the Bible. King David in Psalms 104, describing the majesty of God, he includes this section on the flood. He, that is God, set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. You covered it with the watery depths as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. And then for this next section, I'm going to replace the pronoun with the actual word. But at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder, the water took flight. The water flowed over the mountains. The water went down into the valleys, to the place you assigned for them. You set a boundary the waters cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. You know, we all remember what was said at the end of the flood in Genesis 9, verses 12 and 13, where God promised that he would never cover the earth with water again. Well, I took this picture on a park bench, or a park table actually, and so there's some shadows on there, and unless you have good vision, you probably can't read it very well. But this is a graph that my friend made, and I took a picture of it so I could share it with you. And it has the stages of the flood. On the left, you will see the left bottom corner where the arrow is. It says the flooding stage. And then if you move up from that, it says retreating stage. So there was a flooding stage, and then the water went down a retreating stage. And if we look at the retreating stage, there's two stages within that. One is water eroding in sheets, and then the next is water eroding in channels. And that will help us understand what happened on the Colorado Plateau if we can understand those two. Again, that was water in sheets. The whole, as the Rocky Mountains are coming up, thousands of feet wide, the water is shedding off of the land. But as the water level drops in any particular area, it becomes channelized and has different eroding effects as a whole sheet that erodes. So to help us understand, I'm going to do a little demonstration. And so I'd like the kids that want to come and witness a demonstration. And I need an adult. Is there any adult that wants to get a close look or thinks they're a kid? Or I need somebody to help me with this. Now let's see if it works. Did it work? Oh yes, here we go. So how many kids do we have? Do we have some kids? I want you to gather around this dirt. But now, adult that wants to help, if you could hold this so everybody else can see what's going on. So don't play in the dirt unless your mother and dad don't care if you have dirty hands. I need to come around this side if you can let me. Okay, let's see. Let's put this over here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to pour some water, and you tell me what happens to the water. If I pour it in here kind of slow, what's happening? Where's the water going? It's going down. So if I pour it slowly, it just kind of goes down, doesn't it? Yeah? Okay, now let's see if we give that water some force. Let's see what happens.
It breaks the dirt.
Yeah, see how it doesn't go behind and build a lake, it goes right down its ditch, doesn't it? Have you ever done that with the faucet or the nozzle? No. Well, now you can go back to your seats and we'll talk about that. Thank you. Oh boy. I don't think, let's try it again. I was afraid of that. I think it disrupted my contact with, well, we'll have to start it again. There we go. Okay. What I want you to understand is a concept called water gaps. Has anyone heard of that before, a water gap? Well, there's even something called wind gaps. Water gaps, there's still a river or creek or something flowing through it, but a wind gap, they know it was carved by water, but there's no water in it anymore. So they call it a wind gap. And what I've just tried to illustrate is what can happen with a lot of force and a lot of volume happening over a short period of time. You can end up with gaps. And if you did it slowly over millions of years, no gaps. Okay, we're going to go to Cody, Wyoming. We're a little closer than where I live from Cody, Wyoming. But a number of years ago, we went to Cody, Wyoming and visited East Yellowstone National Park and went along the Shoshone. I think it's pronounced Shoshone. Is that right? At any rate, along the river. So what I want to show you is a short video courtesy of Google Earth, if I can get it to work. So this lake is, I forgot the name of the lake. Bill Cody Lake or something like that, or Bill. Any rate, this is a lake, and the dam is in the notch on the left. And then on the far left corner is Cody, Wyoming. So you got your bearings. Now the question is, why did the water cut through this channel? This channel right there was carved by water. But why did it do that? Here, let's take another look. Let's see if I can get it to go. But you can look at the contour even if I don't get it to go. Let's try it again. I guess I don't know my equipment as well as I'd like. There we go. So you can see this ridge on the far left top corner, and it's open in the middle of the screen. It's not much of a ridge at all. So why did the water cut through that rocky ridge instead of going in the big open area? Because that notch is called a water gap. Doesn't make sense to an evolutionist. It's kind of like me pouring the water behind this little earthen dam, and it just goes right around it. But if you have a lot of water channelized, it can cut through rock. So let's take, there we go. I drew these to help you understand. Let's say this is earlier in the final stages of the flood. The water level is dropped down. That ridge near Cody, Wyoming has a little notch in it, and the water level is just dropping down near the top of the ridge. And it's flowing out the big open area in more of a sheet fashion. But as the water level drops, the water goes out the big open area to the right, but some of it gets channelized in that little notch, and so it starts carving in that little notch. So finally, the water level gets down low enough, it's only carving through the notch and not in the big open area. Does that make sense to you? Okay, that is important. That is major evidence to a flood, a catastrophic event, not millions of years in slow and gradual changes. You don't get this kind of feature in those slow processes. And to help us understand, I find that some of my most productive time in my mind is while I'm taking a shower. Because in a shower, you go through your ritual and you don't have to think about putting that shampoo on your head and doing all the different things. So I'm on automatic pilot in the shower, and I think about other things, and I believe one day God gave me this illustration. So hopefully it makes sense to you. Have any of you had a windshield that looked like that? It's not fun. Well, let's say that you were driving by a farmer's field in the not late evening, but before the sun went down one evening, and the bugs are just everywhere, and you're driving and your windshield gets splattered. Well, if you pulled over to the side of the road and you got out your water bottle and a rag and you started cleaning, and you cleaned all that bug stuff off your windshield so you could actually see where you were going, you got in your car and you sat there, how long would it take of sitting there to end up with a windshield like that? 1,000,000 years? If you sat there 1,000,000 years, would you get bugs on your windshield like that? No. If you were going 1 mile an hour, just barely rolling, would you get a windshield that looked like that? Not unless there was a bunch of Kazakami bugs. You wouldn't get a windshield that looked like that. Maybe 2 miles an hour? No, probably still wouldn't. It would take some speed to get all those bugs to sacrifice themselves on your windshield. The same is true with geological features. Slow, gradual changes over long periods of time just do not explain some of the features that we see. So back to the grand staircase. I think we can better understand maybe some of the evidence that we find at the grand staircase where massive amounts of water could do some of the features that we see. Let's go to Bryce Canyon. Now, Bryce Canyon is up on the top, in a sense, of the Colorado Plateau. And currently, Bryce Canyon, I said, is 8,000 to 9,000 feet elevation. It's erosional limestone. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that it was a lake. Well, yeah, it probably was a temporary lake. When the Colorado Plateau rose up, floodwaters got trapped on this Colorado Plateau in certain areas, and for a short time it probably was a lake. But then it drained catastrophically. And this short little video will give you a bit of an understanding of what the area looks like if you've never been there before. Now notice the ridge in the distance, way in the distance. We'll talk about that again in a minute. This is a tree. And we walked down into what's called the hoodoos at Bryce Canyon, and this tree was growing, and I want you to think about it. This tree has got to be at least 100 years old. It may not seem like 100-year-old Doug fir that we have in the West, but there's very little moisture here. It snows a dusting here and there, rains a little bit once in a while, but very little moisture, so the trees don't grow very fast. Now, if you think about this tree, and if it really was millions of years in the making of these geological features, the tree would be all covered up with all kinds of stuff that had broken off the hoodoos, or the funny-shaped cliffs at Bryce Canyon. Because if you ask the ranger, they're going to tell you that these hoodoos are made from moisture getting into little cracks and then freezing and then breaking the material off. So little by little, the material is sloughing off and falling down. Well, if that were true, after millions of years of this going on, it should be all filled up and hardly any of the hoodoos existing. Let's see. Oh, I thought I just showed you that. Okay, This is a picture that I took at the 8,000 level mark. And if you look across Bryce Canyon, that rim on the far side is the same material that I'm standing on. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out there's a lot of stuff missing in between. Again, it had to be massive erosion in a catastrophic event. But you know, there's other places around the world that have erosional features that are pretty interesting. Does anyone have any guess where this came from? Where? I still didn't hear it. South Dakota, the Badlands of South Dakota. I just got that off the internet, so I thought I'd throw it in to see if you'd had any knowledge of that. Now let's take a look at Zion Canyon and the White and Gray Cliffs. Now, Zion is a truly amazing place. And my niece, I didn't really tell you much about my niece, Madison. God has provided many miracles in her life, and she is in her senior year at Madison University in Virginia, James Madison University in Virginia, and she is majoring in engineering and geology. And they told her she couldn't do it, but God has provided her a way to do it. And she's amazed her teachers. They really respect her. In fact, some of them feel like if they can convince her, because she's a skeptic, she believes in creation, she believes in the Bible's flood, and God has helped her along the way, and she doesn't buy all the stuff that they're teaching her about geology. And the professors just have a hard time understanding how this excellent student can know so much and not be convinced of their view of things. But at any rate, Madison was along on the trip, and part of the reason for even doing this trip was to include Madison. And she came in, we drove in to Zion, and she just, I can't believe it. Oh, look at that. You know, she was shocked by all the stuff that she saw. I'd like to show you blow by blow of everything we did in Zion National Park, but here's a short video that I'll tell you a few things along the way. This trail goes up to Angel's Landing, and it was created in 1926 so the average visitor could climb to the top of what's known as Angel's Landing. This area is in Navajo sandstone. Navajo sandstone, the scientists, secular scientists, believe the origin of the sand in the Navajo sandstone came from the Appalachian Mountains. Now, how do you explain that? Is there a river that runs from the Appalachians to the west? Obviously not. So they don't have an answer, but they've analyzed the sand, and they believe that's where it came from. It's up to 2,000 feet thick, and they say it was deposited in a dry environment, a desert. But there's evidence, strong evidence actually, to suggest that no, it was a marine environment, and we as creationists would expect it to be deposited in a marine or water environment. Now notice as we climb up here, there's actually very little wear from the thousands of people that go up there every year. There's virtually no wear on these rocks. Yet the scientists want us to believe this was all carved out with just wind and rain. One thing that was really impressive for my niece Madison is something called Hummocky. And prior to this trip, I had no concept of what Hummocky is. Does anyone in here know or have heard the term Hummocky? No? Then I could make something up? No, I won't do that. Hummocky is the way that these layers in the sandstone are laid down. And if you look it up on the internet, it'll show these kind of like wave features in the lines within the layer of sandstone. Now, when she was going going on a field trip in Virginia, they went to a place where the Hummocky layer was about 4, maybe 5 inches thick. And that was significant. The professor said he believed that in order to create 4 to 5 inches of Hummocky, it would require a Category 9 hurricane. Did you catch that? A Category 9 hurricane. And then when Madison was looking at the Hummocky in Zion National Park, it was meters thick. Now that'll give you a concept of how violent the flood was. And you know, the professor would just be blown away if he came out west and saw Hummocky in Zion that is meters thick instead of 4 to 5 inches. We also had fun in Zion doing the river walk. And this is a little bit long, so I won't show you the whole thing. But this is a slot canyon carved out in the sandstone layer. And these walls average about 1,000 feet from the river on up. Have any of you had the opportunity to do that? Yeah, there's one. Oh yeah, there's a whole family back there. Yeah, that's a fun trip to be able to walk up there and see all the neat features. Let's see. Oh, you might wonder what some of the dark streaks are. By the way, that's Madison with the orange backpack. The dark coloration on the cliffs is from magnesium and iron that leaches out and stains the rocks that color. Sometimes it's red, and red would indicate iron oxide or iron has stained it. So we're going to skip on past that. Well, I thought I was. Let's see, there we go. So the next place we're going to visit is the Vermillion Cliffs. And they're not as exciting as Bryce and Zion, but they are something worth looking at. As you come down the highway, this is the first glimpse of the Vermillion Cliffs. And there's an even shorter video that shows the Vermillion Cliffs. And they stand about 1,000 feet above the valley floor that's below the Vermillion Cliffs. The valley floor is at the level of the top of the Grand Canyon, the rim of the Grand Canyon. So let's go back to the Grand Staircase. And you notice from right to left you have Bryce Canyon, Pink Cliffs, the Gray Cliffs, Zion Canyon, which is a slot canyon that goes through 2 layers, the Gray Cliffs and the White Cliffs. We've seen the Vermillion Cliffs. There's also something called the Chocolate Cliffs, and the kids seem to be more interested in the Chocolate Cliffs. But I want you to notice the rim of the Grand Canyon. This diagram shows accurate elevation in today's world. Okay? Now the north rim, which is on the right, the north rim of the Grand Canyon is roughly 1,000 feet higher than the left. And the north rim of the Grand Canyon is fairly comparable elevation-wise to the Bryce Canyon or Pink Cliffs. But notice that on the layer level, the rim of the Grand Canyon is down quite a ways from the top of the Colorado Plateau, represented by the Pink Cliffs. Now, this is a short video of us going to the North Rim. The South Rim is 6,800 to 7,400 feet in elevation, and the North Rim is about 8,200 feet. Madison even found some seashells in the very top layer on the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. Now remember, it's about 3,500 feet down from the very top of the Colorado Plateau. And you notice that that rim in the distance, that is the rim above the Grand Canyon. What we are looking into is really a slot canyon. This is compliments of Google Earth, and this is a view of this not slot canyon, I'm sorry. This is a view of a side canyon. Now, you might get away with saying that the river carved the Grand Canyon because there's water moving in it. But what would carve a side canyon? And the only time there's water in the side canyon is when a cloudburst or a thunderstorm passes over and dumps some water, and then for a little while there's a little creek down there. What would carve out a massive side canyon? That's something to consider. You know, when we were in the Grand Canyon, we were lifted out with a helicopter. When we got to the end of our trip, it was 187 miles of rafting we did. When we got to the takeout place, they took us out by helicopter to an airstrip out in the desert, and then they transferred us to a fixed-wing airplane that flew us back to our starting position. And I think it took about 40 minutes to fly back the distance it took us a week to travel on the raft. But as you look out past the strut on this wing, you will see in the distance kind of a dark line way in the distance, and that is Echo Cliffs, and that is about 1,000 feet above the valley. Now, this picture shows the beginning of the Grand Canyon, although in this spot, it's called Marble Canyon. And if you look at it carefully, it almost seems like there's a rise. And I think I have another picture that'll show that a little better, but the water flows from left to right. And here's another picture of one of these barbed canyons. Now that's a term I guess I haven't shared with you yet. A barbed canyon goes the wrong way. So if you have a river flowing this direction, the tributaries come in at angles like this. But in this situation, the river's flowing this way, and the side canyons come this way into the river. So that's called a barbed canyon. That is really tough to explain, unless you believe in the flood. This one shows there's actually a slight rise in the contour of the foreground, and the arrow shows the direction of the water and the beginning of the Grand Canyon. And on the left, you have Echo Cliffs, and that shows Echo Cliffs a little closer. I thought I had one of Vermillion Cliffs. Now this is compliments of Google Earth again, and it's a aerial picture, more or less, of Marble Canyon and the barbed canyons. Now, from what I told you, which way does the water flow? In the direction of the arrow. So in the main channel in the middle is the Colorado River, and it is flowing in the direction of the arrow. But if you notice the canyons, the side canyons, don't come at the right angle. And the reason for that is when this area was carved out, the water was flowing the opposite direction because this part of the plateau rose up, was rising, and so the water tended to flow backwards, and it created these canyons. But then as it eroded down, then the water started coming from the other direction and followed the channel that was already carved. That's how you can carve a canyon uphill. Slow and gradual changes just don't explain this kind of a situation. I know that's a little hard concept to wrap your mind around, but if you have trouble and you want to know more about it or want me to explain it better, you can see me afterwards. This is again one of the side canyons. And this is a little further upstream from the main Grand Canyon. And you can see there's massive amounts of material that's just gone. And there's no water. There's no water in these little channels that are down below. Only in the main channel is the river flowing today. But yet this was carved out by massive amounts of water. Next, I want to talk about something called the Bathtub Ring of the Grand Canyon. Do the kids know what a bathtub ring is? Has your parents ever talked about a bathtub ring? When you're really dirty or you have a lot of bubbles and stuff in your bath water, sometimes when the water drains out, there's a ring around the top of the bathtub. That's called a bathtub ring. Well, the bathtub ring of the Grand Canyon is called the Coconino Sandstone Layer. Coconino sandstone, they haven't figured out where the sand came from, but they say it was in a desert environment. And we don't have sound, so I'll play this video, but you'll have to bear with me in my explanation. This is Dr. John Whitmore. He teaches at a Baptist-based university in Ohio, and he was along on this trip, and he shared a tremendous amount of information about the Grand Canyon with us. And near the beginning, we had opportunity to examine the Coconino Sandstone Layer, because as you progress down the Grand Canyon, the layers are coming up as you're progressing down, so this bathtub ring gets higher and higher and higher. But at the very beginning, we were right close to the Coconino Sandstone Layer. And there was a geologist named Edwin McKee, and in the 30s, he wrote a book or a booklet about the Coconino Sandstone Layer. And he said it was laid down in a desert. Now, would we as creationists that believe in the flood, would we expect a desert layer in the middle of all this? Any ideas? Well, a desert in the middle of the worldwide flood would not make sense. So John Whitmore and Dr. Leonard Brand from Loma Linda, they have examined this layer and analyzed it really carefully. And they have discovered that the only way the Coconino Sandstone Layer could exist was in a wet or water environment, like we would expect. Now, what is the evidence? Well, the angle, if I haven't been watching the video, so I'm not sure where he's at, but the Coconino Sandstone Layer is a first layer where there's angled layers within the layer. And the angle is consistent with water deposited material. It is not consistent with desert or wind deposited material. And it has to do with the way the wind blows and the sand grains are brought over the top of a sand dune and they fall down the other side. That particular angle is around 34 degrees, but if it's in a wet environment, it's 17 to 20 degrees. And all these layers, all in the Coconino Sandstone level, are around 17 to 18 degrees, consistent with water. Now, he also talked about his students doing an experiment. Have you heard of mica? Mica is a mineral, and it's fragile though. Mica is typically a dark or black mineral in the sand, but it's fragile. So if you tumble sand in a dry environment, in other words, the wind blows it over a dune and the sand grains come down the other side, that tumbling action is enough to break up the mica that's in the sand. So what his students did is they took sand with mica, and they could examine it with a microscope and see all the little mica flakes. They put it in a pickle jar, and then they took a propeller and a motor, and they mounted it to the top of the pickle jar so that there would be a current of wind blowing around. And yes, indeed, there was a little sand dune that moved around and around the bottom of the pickle jar. And so the students asked Dr. John Whitmore, well, how long should we leave it in the pickle jar? And he says, oh, I don't know, maybe a month, 6 weeks. Okay, so the first time they let it go for a month. No mica. Okay, well, maybe it could happen shorter. So then they put it in, redid it for a shorter period of time. They finally got it down to 4 days. In 4 days of running this little dune around the bottom of the pickle jar, the mica was broken down into such minute little pieces you couldn't find it anywhere. But in this layer of cochineal sandstone, you can find mica. Now, how can that be? Well, in a water environment, the grains of sand, when they fall down, they have the buoyancy effect of the water, so the grains of sand are landing more gently, and the mica survives. After a year of running the experiment with water, they still found mica flakes. A strong testimony that this cochineal sandstone layer was not laid down in a desert environment. And there's other things too that we could talk about the cochineal sandstone layer, but I know the kids are probably getting restless, so we should do another experiment or demonstration. So if the kids would like to come forward, and who's an adult that knows most of these kids? I need an adult volunteer, maybe a kids division director or something. Okay, now your job, if you choose to accept it, is to pick out 5 kids to help. Oh, Brian, I forgot. Could you bring me a pitcher of water this time? Okay. Now, who are the 5 volunteers? Have you chose Amelia. Okay, would the volunteers line up right here? If she called your name, there should be 5 of you, right? Okay, who's the 5? Okay, turn and face me so I can, okay. I'm going to give you that. And one more. There you go. Okay, guys. Now, when I ask you to, I want you to try to, let's see if I can get this to work again. Is it working? Oh, good. Okay, what I want you to do is try to make some tracks in the sand. Can you make some dinosaur tracks in the sand? Are you making tracks? You don't think it's going to work? Well, what should we do about that? Okay, did Brian bring a pitcher of water yet? It's coming. We're waiting for water. Oh, it's a slow faucet. Okay. Okay, they're trying to make tracks. Are they very successful? It doesn't look like it. So let's see if we can get some water added here. Brian's coming with a bowl this time. Oh, that's good. Is this for foot washing?
Yeah.
Okay, Brian, go ahead and pour the water in there.
The upper end, I take it?
It doesn't matter. Just pour it in there. We just need the sand
Fast
wet.
or slow?
All of it. Yeah, just pour it in there. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just get it wet.
All of it?
Yeah, probably. Okay, guys, see if you can do it carefully. See if you can make some tracks in the sand. Are you having a little more success? Yeah, look at that, if they don't get washed away. Now, you probably can't see on the screen because it's pretty dark. Okay, now, for being helpful and volunteering, you actually get to keep your dinosaurs if you want. Okay. Is it going to work? I haven't figured out how to get this back. No. Well, sorry guys, we'll have to start it again. Okay, you guys can go back to your seats. You did a great job. You see these tracks? They are preserved in the cochineal sandstone layer. Now, isn't that amazing? You can see claw marks. And these little depressions are where they were pushing on the sand. These are not actually going sideways, it's the way I took the picture. And because people may have a hard time conceptualizing that, I turned it around so you could see that they are going uphill, and you can see a little poof of sand where they're pushing to try to get uphill. Somebody asked me how big they were, so I had to go back to the owner of this piece of sandstone, because they don't let you collect in a national park. But fortunately, there's an exposure to the cochineal sandstone that's on private property, and they will take these and sell them as souvenirs. So there's a pen, and you could tell that these tracks are not very big. And there's tracks. Now, if we think about it, how could tracks be preserved like this in a desert environment? They can't. So here is another illustration that this had to be in a marine environment. In fact, if we examine these tracks, what will happen is you'll have tracks going for a little ways, and then they disappear. And then they start again over here, and then they disappear. Also, the tracks are not going straight. It's like the tracks are pointed this way, but their course is at an angle. Also, very, very few tail tracks. You know, if a lizard scurries along the ground, his tail drags and it leaves a particular mark. That is very rare in the cochineal sandstone layer. Now, how can we explain this? Well, Dr. Leonard Brand from Loma Linda has done a lot of study on the cochineal sandstone layer. In fact, he has prayed that God would help him solve mysteries that he's encountered. And whether he prayed about this particular one, I don't know, but he made a tank and demonstrated in a tank of sand and water that if you have a side current and the amphibian or the reptile is trying to go uphill, but you have a side current, then that would account for the tracks going at an angle. Also, the buoyancy effect of the water, sometimes they're off the bottom and they're being carried by the current, and then they'll settle back down and make more tracks, and then be lifted up into another area and then make more tracks. Perfect Perfect explanation. As far as lack of tail marks or tail tracks, you know, the buoyancy of the water, their tail's not always dragging on the bottom. So the bottom line is, if a creationist encounters a problem in the explanation of the world around you, don't give up. Maybe take a shower and think about it in the shower, and God will give you an answer. Because I believe that all true science is supported by the Bible. And we don't have to be ashamed for anything about the Bible being in conflict with science. It's only in conflict with scientists who have eliminated God in the Bible. Now, I threw this in just because it was kind of a neat thing. This is my niece Madison and Dr. Whitmore. And my niece Madison spotted something called load casts. And she explains it, but we don't have sound, so I'll have to tell you. Load cast is where there was a layer laid down of soft material, and then another layer laid down on top of it, and more on top of that, and the pressure pushed one layer down into the soft layer and kind of squeezed it out, and then later got eroded away. And that's called load casts. And my niece spotted this, and Dr. Whitmore was shocked because he'd been up this canyon at least 5 times before, and he'd never seen it. And here's this geology student going up here for the first time, and she spots it. And he says it's the best example of load casts he's ever seen. So at any rate, that's the second one. Let's see if we can get it to go past. So the Grand Canyon, I didn't take this picture. I stole it off the internet. But it's a beautiful picture of the Grand Canyon. And even though we don't have all the answers, we have enough answers to confirm that the Bible is true and that true science supports the Bible. I'd like to pray to close our session tonight, and then I have one more little thing to share with you. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, we thank you for blessing us. We thank you for being our Creator and giving us wisdom and insight. Lord, we ask that you would continue to guide our minds and thinking as we look at the world around us. Help us to more fully understand how you really are the God that created this earth and that there really was a flood. We ask that you would be with each person now, keep them safe as they return home. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. One more thing. If you want to get a hold of me, my address is calmorauske@hotmail.com. And if you want a more detailed 2-hour-long explanation on the Grand Canyon and how it was formed, if you Google search Brian Nickel and include hydroplate theory, there will be a number of things there that come up. But Brian Nickel is an engineering, he was a student, now I guess he's an engineer, and he has done a detailed video and animated illustration to help you understand how, at least it's the best explanation I've ever seen on how the Grand Canyon could have been found, or could have been formed. Also, I know it's a long ways to Portland, Oregon, but next Saturday morning, I'm going to do these 2 illustrations for a group called Design Science Association. And they have brought in a speaker from Michigan. His name is Bruce Malone. And Bruce is going to be talking about how the flood reshaped the surface of the earth and how there are features found all over the earth, from water gaps to these things. See how the layers are bent around? That's called a recumbent fold. And evolutionists just are mystified. They have no idea how that could form, because their concept is this layer was laid down over vast periods of time So how could you get those layers of now rock to be bent all the way back around? So those are the features that are going to be talked about next Saturday in Portland. So if you think you might be in the Portland area, I'll tell you how to find it. Thank you, and that's all for tonight. Oh, it's calmorauske@hotmail.com. Do we want to take time for any questions? Does anyone have a burning question? Or not so burning? Yes, sir. Cochineal sandstone? Go ahead.
If the flood destroyed all of the animals, how would there be an animal to make footprints in the sand?
You know, the flood was a year-long process. They didn't just instantly die. There was a major struggle for life. And, you know, I believe there was all kinds of land. The Bible says all air-breathing animals died in the flood. But because it was not an instant thing, there was a lot of animals that survived for long periods. In fact, creationists have studied dinosaur tracks. And there are dinosaur tracks way up the geological column. And they'll see evidence that the flood eroded out an area, and there's dinosaur tracks on this little knoll in a sense, and then they disappear, and dinosaur tracks appear higher up in another spot. So these dinosaurs were struggling to survive, and they would be taken away by water for part of the time, and then they'd find a little high spot as the water would drain off of that area, and they'd survive for a little while. Another thing is eggs. Dinosaurs typically laid eggs, and scientists will find a whole bunch of eggs. Well, there's no nest. And reptiles typically will make nests. But when they find dinosaur eggs, there's no nests. Well, they were laying those eggs in a stressed environment. It wasn't that they lived there and then they died there. They were stressed because of the flood. And if you think about it, if you have a whole earth covered with water, what's going to happen with tidal action? You know, you're going to have a moon pulling on the earth, and you're going to have tremendous tides and movement of water because there's no land masses to stop it or to break it up. So there was major water shifting back and forth, and finally all the air-breathing animals died. Anyone else have a question? It's not like I'm an expert, so I may just have to tell you I don't know the answer.